Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the video. Today we will be discussing the full breakdown of consciousness, right? So, as always, we'll go over our synopsis, right? What the consciousness actually is from my perspective and all the research I've done. The brain as the receiver, generator, or filter. The global workspace theory, right? Consciousness as a broadcast system. The integrated information theory, consciousness as a unified experience. The self, how the story your brain builds, spirituality and consciousness, reality and perception, and how to use your consciousness to become better in life, right? How to almost enhance it in a way. And if you guys like this new split screen look, let me know. If you want me to go back to the, top corner look, also let me know, trying out different stuff, seeing what you guys like. But without further ado, let's get straight into the breakdown of consciousness. So, what consciousness actually is, right? Again, from my perspective of everything I've researched, right? Consciousness is the fact that there is something it is like to be you, right? It's not just intelligence, it's not just thoughts. It is the field where thoughts, emotions, memories, pain, identity, imagination, and awareness appear, right? It's all those things culminated into one. It includes both what we experience and the fact that we experience it, right? You are the experiencer and the watcher, right? Both experiencing something. It is subjective, only as accessible from the inside, and yet has real effects on behavior and life, right? But science usually breaks it into wakefulness, right? Whether the brain is awake and capable of supporting consciousness, of supporting conscious experience, right? Awareness, whether experience is occurring right now, i.e., sight, sound, thought, feeling, etc. Self awareness, knowing I am the one who is experiencing this, right? It creates the sense of me as a subject, right? Because you are the one who's experiencing it. So it is you, right? And now you have your meta awareness, noticing your own thoughts, emotions, mental states as mental states. And this is awareness, aware of itself, right? It can get a little bit tricky, it can get a little bit weird when explaining it, right? But you're basically just viewing your own thoughts to break it down in the most simplest way, all right? Now, from my understanding, this is what consciousness is not, right? Not the same as intelligence or mental ability. It is not the same as thinking because thoughts appear in consciousness, right? It is not limited to physical senses, not fully explained by current science, and that's where the hard problem remains, right? Here are some key characteristics of the conscious experience, right? Firstly, it's subjective, right? It is a first person point of view. There is no way to tell how you can't physically know how somebody else is experiencing life through their eyes. You can try as much as you want, but there is no possible way to know how someone else is experiencing life through their own eyes, right? You have the unified, right? Experiences feel like one continuous field, not separate fragments. Dynamic, right? It's constantly changing from moment to moment. And you have intentional, always about something, right? A thought, a memory, object, feeling. And then you have evaluative, right? Colored by meaning, emotion, and significance. And then you have unlimited experience, right? We can attend to a small portion of all available information. But why does this matter? All that I just listed, right, are key characteristics of the conscious experience, right? Subjective from person to person. But the reason it matters is because consciousness, from my understanding, shapes how we perceive reality, right? It influences decisions, relationships, purpose, and value. And understanding it a bit better helps us understand ourselves and how to live, right? Researchers studying metacognition argue that awareness of your own thinking is central to understanding how consciousness affects behavior. So you have to do the inner work to really understand how consciousness affects your outer world, right? Because from the inner comes the outer. You know what I mean? Two, the brain as the receiver, the generator, or filter, right? And to help us out a little bit, let me get the handy dandy laser pointer, right? So, the mainstream scientific view is that consciousness depends on brain activity, but there are different interpretations, right? You have the generator theory. The brain creates consciousness. Consciousness emerges from complex neural processes and electrical activity, right? And then you have the receiver theory, in which the brain receives or tunes into consciousness, similar to how radio receives broadcasts from the air, right? So you have one that's saying your brain is actually creating this consciousness from within you. And then you have another that is saying consciousness, your brain is basically just receiving the consciousness that's floating out into the universe, the world, whatever the case may be. And then you have the filter theory, right? The brain limits a wider field of awareness into a narrow range of human experience, filtering out what we cannot perceive. So, essentially, it's hard to explain. It's almost like this theory is basically explaining that you have all this consciousness or whatever the case may be, right? These experiences, but our brain is not able to fully comprehend what's going on, right? So the filter theory says that it's almost squeezing down that experience into what we can perceive or experience, right? If that makes sense, right? Over here, it explains it a little bit better, right? The generator is the brain creates the consciousness. The receiver is that the brain receives or tunes into consciousness. And the receiver is that the brain filters a wider field of awareness, right? It just filters what we can understand, what we can comprehend. And you have modern neuroscience. It does not prove the spiritual version, but it does show that the changing brain changes conscious experience, right? Damage to certain brain areas can change personality, memory, identity, and awareness. Stimulation of certain regions can alter perception or include experiences, right? Chemicals, drugs, meditation, and trauma can all shift states of consciousness, right? Anesthesia is one of the strongest examples. Whether the brain, when certain brain networks are disrupted, ordinary consciousness disappears. No thoughts, no self-awareness, no experience, yet the body can continue to function. This suggests that consciousness is closely tied to brain networks, even if its deeper nature is still debated, right? And we have some key takeaways, right? The brain is essential for human consciousness. Whether it creates, receives, or filters consciousness remains one of the greatest unanswered questions, and all three models may piece together a bigger truth. Slide 3. The global workspace theory, right? Consciousness as a broadcast system. So the core idea is that consciousness arises when information is broadcast across a global workspace in the brain, making it available to many systems at once. Right? So here's my understanding of how it works. Information is processed in specialized brain areas. When important, it is broadcast to the global workspace, right? The system becomes widely available and integrated and reportable, and it can guide behavior, reasoning, and communications. Now, some key features of this workspace theory is that only broadcasted information is conscious, right, from our experience. It has limited capacity, and we can't be conscious of everything. We can only be conscious of things that matter to us, right? Is from what I understand about this theory is that we can only be conscious of things that aren't of great importance to us, right? That explains attention, decision making, and multitasking. And the evidence that supports this is that brain scans show widespread activation when people become aware of something. Disrupting the broadcast makes information unconscious, and it matches how we experience awareness in everyday life. Now, why this matters? It provides a clear, testable model of consciousness. It bridges brain process with subjective experience, and it helps how information becomes part of mine, the you, and something I can know, report, and use. All right. Next slide. Then we go on to the integrated information theory, right? Consciousness as a unified experience. Now, the core idea behind this is that consciousness corresponds to the amount of integrated information generated by a system, right? The more integrated a system, the more interconnected a system, the more conscious it is. And how this works, from my understanding, is that a system has many parts that interact. If the parts are highly connected and depend on each other, right? The system generates integrated information. This integrated information cannot be reduced to the information of its parts. The amount of integration corresponds to the level of consciousness, right? So it all depends on how the parts connect, how everything interacts, and it'll yield a greater response of how consciousness can react to the outer world, from my understanding. Now you have the key principles, right? Exclusion. Information is both integrated and specific. Composition. Complex systems have more than simple ones, right? Cause, effect, power. The systems specify causal structure. You have some examples. A single neuron has very low integrated information, right? A brain has high integrated information due to dense recurrent connections. A rock, from our awareness, has zero integrated information, right? The evidence and support that matches this shows that evidence and support matches many known facts about conscious systems, right? And that explains why damage or disconnection reduces consciousness, and it is still being tested and refined. Now, why this matters is that it offers a quantitative way to study consciousness, and it suggests that consciousness is fundamental and not an illusion, right? So, in knowing that, we can always train it and make it better. And going in more into these slides, I will show you how to train it and make it better, right? And it may apply beyond biology to any system that generates a high integrated information experience. All right, so you have parts that interact, the information is integrated, right? You have the integrated information, and then through that integrated information, you have the conscious experience. Now, slide 5, right? Now you have the self, right? The story your brain builds, right? The self is not a fixed entity. It is a dynamic story constructed by the brain to make sense of experience and guide behavior. Now, how this works is that the brain collects information about the body, right? Your memories, beliefs, and the environment. It organizes this information into a coherent narrative, right? I am this person. I am Bob. I am John. I am Sarah, right? I work at this place. I do this. I do that, right? It's organizing all this information and trying to make sense of the self. So, this story creates a sense of continuity over time, right? The self model helps the brain predict, decide, and interact. Now, the key components of the self story is autobiographical memory, right? The past, acceptance and goals, the future, beliefs, values, and identity, social feedback, and relationships, right? All these things culminated together that you know to be true, right? You are friends with this person, you are this, you are that. The brain tries to culminate all those things together to make sense of the self and who you are connected to, right? Now, the evidence for a constructed self is memories are editable and often inaccurate. Different brain states equals different sense of self, right? Split brain patients can have two selves, right? Illusions, right? Rubber hand can change body ownerships, right? An EG in the rubber hand just stands for example, right? The functions of the self story, right? It creates stability and meaning. It helps plan, learn, and make decisions. It enables communication and social connection. It protects and motivates the organism. You have the limitations and illusions, right? The self can be biased and distorted. You have over identification with the self that causes suffering. There is no single unchanging I, only a flowing process, right? Now, why this matters is that understanding the self as a construct brings freedom and perspective, right? It helps us improve mental well-being and opens the door to a deeper awareness beyond the ego. Now, going from the science-based form of everything, now we shift over to the spirituality and how that relates to consciousness in a way, right? So now you have the core idea, right? Many spiritual traditions explore consciousness as fundamental, transcendent, or connected to something greater than the individual self, right? Now, the key questions spirituality asks, right, is what is the nature of awareness, right? What is the nature of it all? Where does it come from, right? Are we separate beings or expressions of one reality? What is the purpose of life and suffering, right? Can consciousness evolve? Can it evolve from the state that we are now, right? Because when you look at a dog, you might think that that dog has a lower state of consciousness, right? But it's just as conscious as we are. We just have a higher level of intelligence than that animal, right? So, in knowing that, can the consciousness evolve into something greater, right? Is there a higher state of consciousness? Now, the common spiritual views on consciousness are non duality, right? You have the self and the universe, and they are not separate. You have the higher self. There is a deeper, wiser part of us beyond the ego. You have the universal consciousness, right? All beings are connected through a shared awareness, right? Then you have the awakening, right? You have realizing that our true nature is beyond our thoughts and stories. Then you have the belief of transcendence, which is states of consciousness can go beyond ordinary mind and identity. Now, the practices that many people that follow religion, spirituality, etc., practice is that they have meditation, right? It quiets the mind and reveals deeper awareness. You have prayer. It opens the connection to something greater, right? You have nature. It dissolves the sense of separation. And you have breath work, right? That shifts the state and increases presence, right? Increases the present moment of where you are in the moment, essentially. And then you have ritual and ceremony, right? It creates meaning and alignment. Now, science and spirituality, a lot of people think that they're opposites and that they're separate, right? But I believe that they're not opposite. Science studies the brain and measurable states. Spirituality explores meaning, purpose, and direct experience. Both can deepen the understanding of consciousness, right? If they both work in tandem, they can understand the true meaning of consciousness, right? They answer different questions but can support each other. Then you have the benefits of spiritual exploration, right? The greater inner peace and resilience, reduced ego and fear, more compassion and connection, access to expanded states and insights, and a deeper sense of meaning and belonging, right? And they have some cautions and discernment when it comes to these, right? Because not all spiritual experiences are the same, right? Because you have Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, right? They're not all the same, right? So it's important to stay grounded and critical and avoid bypassing dogma or spiritual ego. True growth is reflected in daily life, right? When you filter it all down, they all have a sense of one thing, right? Being kind to other people, right? Being a good neighbor, being a good this, being a good that, right? It all boils down to make the best of what you have with what you have, right? Now, why this matters is that spirituality invites us to explore the deeper dimensions of consciousness and our place in existence, right? Not just to believe, but to directly discover, right? Again, you have the different paths, but same exploration, right? Mysticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they all have different paths, but they all filter down to the same thing, right? They all filter down to be a good person, be good to thy neighbor, figure out what this life has to offer, and make the most of it, right? That's what it all boils down to, from my understanding. Then you have conscious reality and perception. Consciousness, reality, and perception, right? The core idea from this is that we don't experience reality itself, but we experience a model of reality built by the brain from limited information, right? So how perception works is that our senses gather raw data from the environment. Our brain filters, organizes, and interprets it based on that past experience, beliefs, and goals. It creates a seamless, useful model of the world. Consciousness becomes aware of that model as if it were a reality. Now, some key principles to take away from that is that perception is constructive, not passive. We are aware of a version, not the whole truth. Different minds create different realities, and language shapes how we perceive and categorize the world, right? Now, some examples of this are the blind spot in your vision, right? Your brain fills in that missing part. Then you have optical illusions, right? It shows how the brain can be fooled. Color doesn't exist out there. It's interpreted by your brain. That's why some people are colorblind. That's why some people aren't. And time is experienced but not seen. Your brain creates the flow, right? You can't physically see time, right? It is just experienced, right? One day you're young, the next day you're old, right? You just get older each day. If there were no clocks, no nothing, you wouldn't be able to experience, or you wouldn't be able to physically see time, if that makes sense, right? Now, the evidence and support behind this is that the brain predicts and only updates when something doesn't fit. Studies show we see what we expect to see, right? Hallucinations prove perception and can occur without external input, and different cultures perceive and interpret the world differently. And the reason why this matters is that understanding understanding this gives intellectual humility. It reduces suffering from rigid beliefs and assumptions. It opens the door to deeper understanding, empathy, and freedom, and it empowers you to question, explore, and evolve your perception. Right? The key takeaway from this is that the map is not the territory. Your perception is useful, but it is not the ultimate truth. Right? Stay cautious, question your assumptions, and expand your awareness. Lastly, how to use your consciousness to become better in life, right? To expand your life, to enhance your life. So the core idea is that consciousness is not something you have, it's something you can develop and use intentionally to create a better life, right? We wake up every day taking granted of the fact that we're conscious, that we can live and that we can interact with different things, but nobody actually ever talks about how to enhance it, right? Now, why this matters is that most people live on autopilot, right? Higher consciousness leads to better choices, relationships, health, and purpose. You become the observer and the creator of your life and not just the reactor. Right? I'm big on being proactive and not reactive in life. Now, some principles for using consciousness are that awareness creates choice, right? Be aware of your decisions in the moment, right? Attention shapes your reality. Intention directs energy. Reflection creates growth, and integration leads to transformation. And some practical ways to develop and use consciousness are mindfulness, right? Be present in the moment. Notice your thoughts, feelings, and sensations, right? When you feel a bad feeling, Just be mindful of it. Just be aware of it. Don't let it eat you up and overtake you, right? Then you have self-awareness. Understand your patterns, triggers, and beliefs. Then you have emotional intelligence. Feel fully, but don't let emotions control you, right? That's the worst thing I feel like a person can do, is let their emotions fully control them. Because when you do that, it can just lead to bad things all around. Then you have focus and attention. You direct your attention to what matters most. Purpose and values. You live in alignment with what is deeply meaningful. And you have compassion and connection. See the same consciousness in others, right? Essentially, try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And some daily practices you can practice are meditation or breath awareness, right? 10 to 20 minutes a day, journaling and self reflection, gratitude practice, limit distractions and information overload, spend time in nature, right? If possible, read, learn, and expand your perspective. Now, here are some common obstacles in the way of that, right? Distraction and overstimulation, ego, fear, and insecurity, old habits and autopilot living, and negative self talk and limiting beliefs, right? I'm big on not having limited beliefs. Limited beliefs are the things that keep you down in your life, right? As a human, you have the choice of taking off the limiters in your life. There is no reason why you should have any limiters on your life, right? The sky is not the limit. You can go past the sky, to be honest with you. You can go to space if you want to. You know, you can shoot for the stars. Shoot for the stars. I promise. If you shoot for the stars, you'll land somewhere among them, right? You just have to take off those self-limiting beliefs. And the outcome is greater clarity and peace, better decisions in relationships, resilience in challenges, and a more meaningful and fulfilling life, right? Remember, you have the power to choose and grow and create a life of meaning and impact. Use your consciousness wisely and every day, right? When you wake up, be happy that you're alive. Be happy that you can have this experience, because not many people have the chance to have that experience, right? Make the most of it. Chase your dreams and do what you know is right for your life. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one.